257.
Welcome to AI Vision, where we explore the infinite potential of artificial intelligence. I am your host, Martin G.J. As you may already know, ChatGPT is only updated with data up to 2021, and is not aware of the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia, which has now been ongoing for over a year. That's why I asked ChatGPT what it thinks might happen in such a conflict. And I have to say, the answers were quite intriguing, which I will share with you in this video. So, let's dive right in and explore ChatGPT's predictions. Afterwards, I would love to hear your thoughts and comments on this. So without further ado, let's get started. ChatGPT. If Russia starts a war and occupies and annexes eastern Ukraine, what will happen then?
If Russia were to start a war and occupy and annex eastern Ukraine, it would have significant and far-reaching consequences for Ukraine, Russia, and the international community. Firstly, Ukraine would be severely impacted as it would lose control over a significant portion of its territory, and its people would be subjected to the rule of the occupying Russian forces. This could lead to human rights abuses, displacement of populations, and an increase in violence and instability in the region. Secondly, Russia would face international condemnation and potential economic sanctions for its actions. The annexation of Crimea in 2014 led to significant sanctions being imposed on Russia, and a similar scenario could play out if it were to annex eastern Ukraine. Thirdly, the conflict could escalate and draw in other countries. Ukraine has alliances with several Western nations, and they could become involved in the conflict, potentially leading to a wider conflict in the region. Finally, the annexation of eastern Ukraine would be a violation of international law, and it would be viewed as a threat to the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. The international community would likely take measures to pressure Russia to reverse its actions and restore Ukraine's territorial integrity. In summary, the annexation of eastern Ukraine by Russia would have severe consequences for all parties involved and could potentially escalate into a wider conflict with significant regional and global implications.
Russia will have problems obtaining modern weapons due to the sanctions against Russia. How will it affect the war?
If Russia faces difficulties in obtaining modern weapons due to sanctions, it could have significant implications for the war in eastern Ukraine. Russia has traditionally relied on its military strength, and a lack of access to modern weapons could impact its ability to sustain its military presence in Ukraine and conduct offensive operations. Sanctions against Russia could restrict its ability to purchase advanced military equipment, including aircraft, tanks, and missile systems, which could limit its operational capability in eastern Ukraine. In addition, sanctions could make it more difficult for Russia to maintain and repair existing weapons systems, leading to further degradation of its military capabilities. However, it is important to note that Russia has a domestic arms industry, and it could potentially ramp up production of domestically produced weapons to compensate for a lack of access to foreign-made systems. Russia has also demonstrated its ability to operate effectively with outdated equipment, as seen in its conflict with Georgia in 2008. The impact of sanctions on the war in eastern Ukraine would also depend on the level of international support for the sanctions regime. If major powers such as China or India continue to trade with Russia and supply it with advanced weaponry, the impact of the sanctions may be limited. In summary, sanctions against Russia could limit its ability to obtain modern weapons, potentially impacting its military capability in eastern Ukraine. However, Russia's domestic arms industry and potential support from other countries could offset the impact of the sanctions to some extent. The ultimate outcome of the war would depend on a range of factors, including military strategy, international support, and the willingness of both sides to negotiate a peaceful resolution.
Do you think Russia will feel compelled to use nuclear weapons in this war?
It is highly unlikely that Russia would feel compelled to use nuclear weapons in the war in eastern Ukraine. The use of nuclear weapons would have catastrophic consequences, not only for Ukraine but for the entire region and the world. Nuclear weapons are a last resort, reserved for extreme situations where the survival of the state is at stake. The conflict in eastern Ukraine does not rise to that level, and the use of nuclear weapons would be widely condemned by the international community, leading to severe diplomatic and economic consequences for Russia. In addition, Russia's nuclear doctrine emphasizes the use of nuclear weapons only in response to a nuclear attack or in the event of an existential threat to the state. The use of nuclear weapons in a conventional conflict would be a significant departure from this doctrine and could lead to internal criticism of the Russian leadership. Therefore, while the conflict in eastern Ukraine is a serious issue, it is highly unlikely that Russia would resort to using nuclear weapons in this context. It is important for all sides to work towards a peaceful resolution of the conflict and avoid any actions that could escalate tensions further.
Do you think such a war, where Ukraine gets support from EU and USA against Russia, supported by China, could develop into a third world war?
It is highly unlikely that a conflict between Ukraine, supported by the EU and the US, and Russia, supported by China, would escalate into a third world war. While tensions between major powers have increased in recent years, and the risk of conflict has risen, it is still unlikely that a full-scale global conflict will occur. Firstly, both the EU and the US have stated that they support Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, but they have also emphasized the importance of a peaceful resolution to the conflict. These countries are unlikely to take actions that could escalate the situation further, and they are more likely to focus on diplomatic and economic pressure to resolve the conflict. Secondly, China's support for Russia is primarily based on economic and geopolitical considerations, and it is not likely to enter into a direct military conflict with the US or its allies. China has traditionally followed a policy of non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries, and it has emphasized the importance of diplomacy and peaceful resolution of conflicts. Finally, the consequences of a Third World War would be catastrophic, not only for the countries involved but for the entire world. All major powers are aware of this fact and are likely to avoid actions that could lead to a global conflict. In summary, while tensions between major powers have increased, it is unlikely that a conflict between Ukraine and Russia, supported by different powers, would escalate into a Third World War. The international community is likely to focus on diplomatic and economic pressure to resolve the conflict, and major powers are unlikely to take actions that could lead to a global conflict.
That was all for this time. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.
2, 5, 7.